Kia ora, good evening. The Greens are calling on the government to act to ease the pressure on manufacturers and exporters caused by the high New Zealand dollar. They say our trading partners are manipulating their currencies to protect manufacturers, while the national government here does nothing. Emma Jolliffe reports.
40,000 jobs have been lost in New Zealand's manufacturing sector in the 4 years to June. The International Monetary Fund estimates our dollar's overvalued by 15%, and the Greens say it's time the government intervened to bring it down. They want the Reserve Bank to expand the currency supply, or in old terms, print money. Money to buy assets.
We're proposing that the assets they should purchase are earthquake recovery bonds issued by central government, which means the government has to borrow less from overseas, which reduces the pressure on the New Zealand dollar.
Also to invest in the Natural Disaster Fund. But the government says printing money would lift the cost of living for all New Zealanders.
All that would do is make the international market look at New Zealand and say, no, you're losing the plot. And what we really need to do is just continue to work hard to grow the New Zealand economy.
But economist Ganesh Nana agrees the government needs to act.
It's a market failure that we've got a New Zealand dollar that is just so inappropriate for the New Zealand export sector.
It's a bit tough for some exporters, but it's actually a vote of confidence in the New Zealand economy.
Every cent of the New Zealand dollar calculation affects our bottom line by $150,000 a month.
Nana says China, the US, Europe, the UK and Japan are all manipulating their currencies to their benefit.
We in little old New Zealand are left high and dry trying to abide by a textbook that's now way out of date.
Labor says the Reserve Bank should focus less on inflation and more on the exchange rate.
The National Party are ignoring international trends and we're losing jobs in New Zealand as a consequence.
The downside of printing money is of course inflation, but Ganesh Nana describes inflation as yesterday's problem and says we're facing a much scarier problem, the prospect of deflation. Emma Jolliffe, 3 News.
The Prime Minister lost use of one of his favourite political weapons today thanks to a policy U-turn by the Greens over printing money to improve the exchange rate. Political editor Patrick Gower explains.
Russell Norman takes the bus to work, but today he backed up the bus big time, ditching his idea of printing money to bring down the overvalued Kiwi dollar. In politics, that's what's called a U-turn.
It shows that we have the ability to listen, and I think that that's what New Zealanders expect from their politicians.
But it's clear the Greens also got sick of listening to its loudest critic. John Key attacks the idea on a daily basis. It's his favourite way of undermining the economic credibility of a Labour-Green partnership.
Which would be printing a lot of money.
Why don't we just print lots of money? I mean, you know, now that they want to print money.
It looks like you've been bullied by John Key.
Well, Paddy, I mean, I think I can stand here with my hand on my heart and say, of all the politicians in New Zealand, I'm probably one of the ones that stands up to John Key day in and day out and takes him on.
And Key will just keep on coming.
And even if the Greens today are telling New Zealanders that they're not going to print money, they'll be dreaming up some other wacky and crazy idea.
Known as quantitative easing, it's been done by some of the world's big economies, although Norman could get no political support whatsoever here.
Well, we never agreed with that.
But Norman is still keen on being Finance Minister in a Labour-Green government.
Well, we shall see. It's all the portfolios are on the table.
And David Shearer really doesn't like the thought of that.
If it's a Labour-led government, it will be a Labour Finance Minister.
The Greens had no other choice. It was this simple: suck up an embarrassing U-turn now, or give Key a free pass to attack a Labour-Greens alliance right up until election day. Patrick Gower, 3 News.
But while that inner guts of the system, the web of contracts, is important, the even more important driver of financial instability is simply rising leverage of a particular form, and a particular form on which finance theory and macroeconomics has been entirely silent, or mainly silent, or to the extent that not silent, it has been wrong. If you pick up most undergraduate textbooks, and we were talking earlier this morning about the role of what we have to do in teaching undergraduates and graduate economics, and you see how they describe the role of the banking system, they make 2 mistakes. First of all, they describe a system which takes money from savers and lends it to borrowers, failing to realize that the banking system creates credit, money and purchasing power ab initio, de novo, and with an important role, therefore, within the economy. But also, Again and again, it says, well, what banks do is they take deposits from households and they lend money to businesses, making, as Joe referred to earlier, the capital allocation process between alternative capital investments. As a description of what modern advanced economy banking systems does, this is completely mythological.
Apart from the 2% of coins and notes within our money supply, would you agree that that what makes up the other 98% all originates as interest-bearing debt owed to private lending institutions? No. You don't agree?
But I put it to you, we're a small open economy, we have high levels of private sector debt, mum and dad have borrowed that debt effectively from foreigners because their local bankers sourced that from foreigners.
Apart from the 2% of coins and notes within our money supply, would you agree that that what makes up the other 98% all originates as interest-bearing debt owed to private lending institutions? No. You don't agree?
But I put it to you, we're a small open economy, we have high levels of private sector debt, mum and dad have borrowed that debt effectively from foreigners because their local bankers sourced that from foreigners.
Stephen Joyce. Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I thought the honourable member had a better grasp of economics in that the idea that you could borrow money to invest in the share market and raise money is one of those fallacies that most families decide not to do because they realise that actually if you could borrow your way to success, we'd have done that in this country a long, long time ago.
There are, of course, many reasons why Iceland has recovered earlier and more effectively than any other European economy that suffered from the financial crisis. But there are two fundamental dimensions to how we did it differently from others. The first is that we did not follow the prevailing orthodoxies of the Western financial world, the so-called Washington consensus of the last 30 years. We, for example, let the private banks fail. And I have never understood why the banks are somehow treated like the holy churches of the modern economies and are not allowed to fail. Secondly, we did not introduce the similar kind of austerity measures that have been almost mandatory in many other countries. We tried to protect the health service, the educational service, the welfare of those with the least income in our country. We introduced capital controls, and we let the currency devalue. And we did many other things that were not deemed to be orthodox within the prevailing recommendations in the last 30 years. But the second dimension is that we were fortunate somehow to realize early on that this was not just a financial crisis. This was also, for the first time in modern memory, a profound political, democratic, social, and even a judicial crisis. And unless you introduced reforms on all these levels, as well as the right economic policies, you would never be able to galvanize the nation to move forward. And many people tend to forget that an economy is not just a set of associations between financial institutions and companies and so on. An economy is fundamentally a community of people. And unless the people feel confident and have a vision and the will to move forward, it doesn't matter what kind of policies you try to implement, you will never be able to succeed. And these two dimensions are, in my opinion, one of the reasons why, despite there are still difficulties, of course, why Iceland is now in a better position than anybody, including us, could have expected 4 or 5 years ago.